The message had been burning a hole in Rachel's mind for 3 days. He didn't act alone. 3 words. 5 syllables. A grenade with no pin. She pulled every thread she could find: call logs, wire transfers, sealed court filings, her apartment walls, bleeding red string, and sticky notes. By midnight, she wasn't sleeping. She wasn't eating. She was hunting. And then she found it. Buried inside a routine commission audit from 4 years ago was a disbursement flagged, then quietly unflagged, by a single attorney's signature. Rachel's blood ran cold when she recognized the letterhead. Hartwell and Crane, LLC. The same firm that had filed her annulment papers. The same firm that swore, under oath, that her marriage to Pinto had been legally dissolved before the commission seat was ever assigned. They had lied. All of it staged. She dug faster now, hands trembling. Hartwell and Crane hadn't just handled her annulment. They were the commission's retained legal counsel. For 11 years. They had access to every budget line, every discretionary fund, every quiet transfer that never made the evening news. And over those 11 years, nearly $4 million had evaporated into shell accounts, slowly, surgically, invisibly. Until Pinto started asking questions. Rachel pressed her palm flat against the desk to stop it from shaking. They hadn't used Pinto as a scapegoat after the fact. They had built him into one from the very beginning. The scandal, the affair accusations, the leaked documents that destroyed his credibility, all manufactured. Not to protect a political rival. To protect themselves. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "You're getting close." The voice was male. Measured. Chillingly calm. "We've been watching you get close." Rachel's throat tightened. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants you to stop before you find the one thing that changes everything." A pause, precise as a scalpel. "The annulment was never real, Rachel." "Which means your seat on the commission." Another pause. "Neither is." The line went dead. Rachel stood in the silence of her apartment, the red string trembling in the draft from the window, and realized she wasn't investigating them anymore. She was already their next target. If you're watching part 2, thank you for being here. But to fully understand the story, the choices, the emotions, and the shocking moments, you need to watch part 1 too. That's where everything truly began. After this, go back and watch part 1. And if you enjoyed the story, please like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Now, she didn't call the press. She didn't call the police. Rachel Osei sat down at her laptop at 2:17 a.m., cracked her knuckles, and went to war. Not the kind with cameras. The kind with code. She had spent 12 years as a forensic financial analyst before politics swallowed her whole, and Hartwell and Crane had made one catastrophic mistake. They'd assumed she'd forgotten who she was before the commission, before the title, before Pinto. They had no idea they were dealing with a woman who once unraveled a Caribbean money laundering ring using nothing but a spreadsheet and 3 days without sleep. Tonight, she had both. She moved through their shell accounts like a ghost: Cyprus, Cayman, Luxembourg, each transfer a breadcrumb they'd left behind in arrogance. By 3 a.m., she had frozen the first account. By 4, the second. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was ablaze. Every dollar she touched had a family behind it: a widow who never got her husband's pension, a daughter who aged out of a support program that Pinto was blamed for defunding, lives quietly dismantled so 4 partners at a law firm could buy second homes and sleep soundly. Not tonight. By 5:44 a.m., Hartwell and Crane's liquid assets were gone. Every illegal holding, $6.2 million, redirected into a blind trust she'd spent the last hour legally establishing, registered under the names of 11 families. Untouchable. Irrevocable. Done. She leaned back and exhaled for the first time in days. Then her doorbell rang. She froze. It was 6 in the morning. She crossed the apartment slowly, checked the peephole, and felt the air leave her lungs. It was Pinto. Not the Pinto from the headlines, broken, disgraced, hollow-eyed. This Pinto was dressed sharply, expression unreadable, holding a manila envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. "I know what you did tonight," he said quietly when she opened the door. "And I need you to know," he paused, jaw tight, "so do they. Rachel, they didn't just set me up." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "They set you up. From the very beginning. And the proof." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "It has your signature on it." She buried her phone in the bottom of a bag she didn't plan to open. Rachel drove the last 40 minutes to her grandfather's farmhouse with the windows down and the radio off, the Tuscan hills unfolding around her like something she hadn't earned yet, but desperately needed. The envelope Pinto had handed her was locked in a safety deposit box in Geneva. The trust was secured. The firm was finished. And she, for the first time in 11 years, had nowhere to be. The farmhouse smelled like cedar and old rain. Like her grandfather's hands. Like before. The vineyard was nearly dead. 3 acres of ancient Sangiovese, unpruned and strangled by neglect, the vines twisted into themselves like they'd given up mid-reach. Her grandfather had always said vines didn't die from drought. They died from abandonment. Standing there in her city shoes, soil pressing up through the grass around her ankles, Rachel understood, for the first time, that he hadn't only been talking about vines. She started the next morning. No title. No staff. No protocol. Just her hands, a pair of pruning shears, and the suffocating silence she was slowly, painfully learning to stop running from. The weeks blurred together in the most beautiful way, early light, hard labor, the ache in her shoulders that felt honest in a way that boardrooms never had. She stopped checking encrypted channels. She stopped scanning faces in the village market. She let her hair grow. She forgot, briefly and blessedly, what it felt like to be the ghost of Milan. The first new shoot appeared on a Thursday. Pale green, impossibly fragile, curling upward from a vine she'd almost written off. Rachel crouched in the dirt and stared at it for a long time. Something cracked open in her chest that she didn't have a word for yet. She was still crouching there when she heard gravel shift behind her. Slow footsteps. Deliberate. Someone who knew how to move without announcing themselves. She didn't turn around. Her hand found the pruning shears in the grass beside her. "They told me you'd be here." The voice was a woman's. Accented. Precise. "I've been sent by the people whose names were on that trust, Rachel." A pause that stretched like wire pulled too tight. "Not to thank you. To warn you." Conti Alderani didn't call ahead. Men like him never did. He arrived at the farmhouse on a gray Tuesday morning in a car that cost more than the entire vineyard, flanked by 2 men whose stillness made the air feel pressurized. Rachel saw the convoy from the upper terrace and didn't move. She finished pruning the row she was working on, set down her shears, and wiped her hands on her trousers before walking down to meet him. He was older than she remembered. Smaller. But his eyes were the same, black, bottomless, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had never once in his life been told no. "You look well," he said, as though he'd arranged it. She didn't offer coffee. "What do you want, Conti?" He smiled, that thin, precise smile she'd seen defuse boardrooms and destroy careers in the same breath. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. Cream paper. Gold letterhead. The kind of offer that didn't come twice. A permanent seat. Full autonomy. Resources she couldn't dream of from a Tuscan farmhouse. And protection for her, for everything she loved, in perpetuity. "You've earned this," he said simply. "More than anyone who's ever held it." Rachel looked at the document for a long moment. She thought about the weight of encrypted phones and midnight wire transfers and red string on apartment walls. She thought about what she'd become inside that world, precise, untouchable, bloodless. The ghost of Milan. A woman her own children had looked at sometimes like they were trying to find their mother behind her eyes. She folded the document closed and handed it back. "No." Alderani didn't flinch, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something dangerous. Rachel. I'm done. Her voice was steady as the hills behind her. I'm done. He studied her for a long moment, really studied her, then nodded once, slowly, as a man concedes a chess match he didn't see coming. He turned, walked back to the car, and was gone. Rachel stood in the gravel until the sound of the engine dissolved into birdsong. Then her daughter appeared in the farmhouse doorway, barefoot, holding 2 glasses of juice. And behind her, unmistakably, was Pinto, watching Rachel with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Fear. The afternoon light came in gold and unhurried, the way Tuscan light always did, like it had nowhere else to be. Rachel sat at the edge of the upper terrace, bare feet in the warm grass, watching her daughters tear through the vineyard rows like they owned the earth beneath them. Their laughter arrived in waves, carried up by the breeze, and each time it reached her she felt something in her chest loosen just a little more. Like scar tissue finally learning to breathe. Then, a sound that stopped her heart completely. A gasp from her youngest daughter. Mama. Mama, look. Rachel turned. Tobias, 14 months old, stubborn as iron, who had resisted every coaxing attempt for weeks, was standing alone in the grass 3 feet from his blanket. Wobbling. Arms out. Face screwed into an expression of violent concentration. And then he stepped. 1 foot. Then the other. Then a third, lurching step that nearly toppled him before he caught himself, grinning now, grinning like he'd just conquered something enormous, because he had. Rachel was on her knees in the grass before she knew she'd moved, arms open, tears she hadn't planned streaming freely down her face. He crashed into her with his whole body, and she held him so tightly he squealed, and her daughters came running and collapsed around them both, and for one suspended, luminous moment the world was only this, her children, the sun, the living vines, the smell of earth and something new beginning. This, she thought. This is what I chose. She was still holding Tobias when her phone buzzed on the blanket beside her. The number was blocked. She almost ignored it. Almost. She answered. Rachel. A voice she didn't recognize. Female. Young. Urgent. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I worked for Hartwell and Crane for 6 years before you burned them down. A sharp exhale. You missed something. A sub-account. Offshore. Active. The voice dropped lower. Rachel, they used it to fund something that has nothing to do with the commission. Something that's been running for decades. The vineyard seemed to go very quiet. And your name, the voice whispered, is on the founding documents. Tobias laughed in her arms, reaching for the sun. Rachel couldn't move. She heard the gate creak before she saw him. Rachel was on her feet instantly. Tobias pressed against her hip, her free hand moving by muscle memory toward the pruning shears on the terrace wall. Her daughters fell silent behind her. They had learned, without being taught, to read their mother's stillness. The figure at the gate was slight. Young, holding nothing but a cloth satchel and a posture so visibly terrified it almost broke her guard before reason could stop it. She knew that face. Marco, 23 years old. Junior filing clerk at the commission for less than a year before the investigation swallowed everything whole. She had once, in the middle of a brutal 16-hour session, noticed him skipping lunch because he'd forgotten his wallet and sent her driver to bring him back a sandwich without mentioning it to anyone. He looked like the memory of that sandwich had kept him alive ever since. I'm alone, he said quickly, hands raised. I've been alone this whole time. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Then she opened the gate. He sat at the outdoor table with both hands wrapped around a glass of water he barely touched. He explained everything in a low, rapid voice, the USB, the risk, the 6 months he'd spent moving through 4 countries to make sure he wasn't followed here. She listened without interrupting, watching his eyes for the thing that would tell her this was wrong. She didn't find it. Then he reached into the satchel. These aren't from me, he said quietly. They were in the sealed annex of your commission file. Someone buried them there years ago. I don't know why. He set a bundle of letters on the table between them, cream envelopes, ribbon-bound, edges soft with age. The handwriting on the top envelope made Rachel's breath catch in her throat. Rochelle. Her grandmother's name. Her name. Written in a hand she'd only ever seen on one photograph kept in a frame above her grandfather's fireplace. Her fingers trembled as she reached for them. Marco stood to leave, then stopped. There's one more thing. His voice dropped to almost nothing. The last letter, it was never sealed. He swallowed hard. Someone read it recently, Rachel. The ink on the fingerprints, forensics, dates them to last month. She read the letters alone. After Marco left, after the children were fed and bathed and folded into sleep, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with a single candle and her grandmother's words and didn't move for 2 hours. Rochelle Osei had written them across 20 years, to a husband who died too early, to a God she argued with constantly, to a daughter who never wrote back. They were not elegant letters. They were not the letters of a woman who had power or title or rooms that fell silent when she entered. They were the letters of a woman who had loved so ferociously, so without apology or strategy, that the pages still trembled with it 60 years later. The world will try to tell you what you are worth, her grandmother had written in the last sealed letter, the one with the fresh fingerprints Rachel was trying not to think about. Asterisk, do not let it. A woman who protects what she loves is more dangerous than any weapon they will ever try to make of her. Asterisk. Rachel set the letter down slowly. She had spent 11 years becoming untouchable. She had built walls so precise they looked like elegance, a reputation so immaculate it functioned like armor. She had called it power. She had called it survival. She had called it necessary. But her grandmother, this woman who owned nothing and moved nobody and died in a small house in Accra without a single headline to her name, had understood something Rachel was only now. At the kitchen table with candle wax pooling and her children breathing softly down the hall, beginning to grasp. She was not remarkable because of what she could destroy. She was remarkable because of what she refused to let them take. The candle guttered. Rachel pressed her palm flat against the last letter, feeling the paper like a pulse. Then her phone lit up on the table beside her. A message. No sender. No number. Just 7 words that made the warmth drain from the room entirely. We know who read the letter, Rachel. A second message arrived before she could breathe. It was your mother. Rachel hadn't spoken to her mother in 14 years. Hadn't spoken to her because 14 years ago, her mother had told her she was dead. She brought the letters to the porch. Not the phone. Not the encrypted drive that had lived in her jacket pocket for so long it had worn a ghost of itself into the lining. Just the letters, ribbon-bound, warm from her hands, smelling faintly of cedar and something older than memory. She sat in the chair her grandfather had built, white-armed, sun-bleached, permanent as the hills, and watched her children in the last of the evening light. Her daughters were spinning in the open grass, arms out, heads back, laughing at the sky for no reason at all. Tobias sat at the edge of the terrace in a patch of clover, gravely inspecting a beetle with the focused intensity of someone who had nowhere else to be. Rachel watched them and felt the ledger close. She had kept it for years, every betrayal, every debt, every name on every list. She had known without checking what was owed to her and by whom and with what interest. It had felt like justice. It had felt like control. It had felt, on the worst nights, like the only thing holding her upright. But watching Tobias poke gently at that beetle, watching her daughters spin themselves dizzy and collapse into the grass shrieking with joy, she understood that she had been keeping the wrong record all along. Pinto had left a scar. She would not pretend otherwise. But scar tissue was tougher than the skin it replaced. Her children knew it. They had been born into the aftermath of that wound, and they had grown luminous, fearless, whole, in spite of everything. Because of her. Her children were not her consolation prize. They were her evidence. She pressed the letters against her chest and breathed. Then the gate at the bottom of the path opened. Rachel's eyes moved their immediately old instinct, unshakable, and she went very still. A woman stood at the entrance to the property. Older. Smaller than Rachel remembered from a photograph taken 30 years ago. But the posture was unmistakable. The jawline. The way she held her hands clasped low, patient, as if she had been practicing this moment for a very long time. Her mother looked up the path and found Rachel's eyes. And she was weeping.